Many of us here in this room worked with Mark in 2009 to help provide more awareness, education in the community about the Davenport Promise, and we see a fiscal concern of similar nature in terms of magnitude and lack of awareness in the community, and that's why Opt4Better has re-energized its efforts to try and educate the community, and we hope to share with you some compelling arguments and some action steps that can help for more fiscal sobriety in Scott County. And Mark Nelson is here today to present, and without further ado, Mr. Nelson, thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming. I'm going to be real quick today because I think we're competing with Governor Branstad at the Rotary Luncheon, right, Diane?
Yes.
Focus of the discussion today is residential tax rates and the homeowners. A very undercovered, if not completely missed item in December was when the State Department of Revenue introduced the residential rollback rate for 2011, that being 50.7518% of residential property value. What was missed with that is effectively a 4.58% increase in the property taxes payable by any residential property owner within the state of Iowa. In gross dollars, I'm sure that probably will amount to the largest tax increase we've had in a long time, but it's in small pieces in all the little communities. The focus of the discussion today is on those residential tax rates because they've been increasing for several years due to the residential rollback increasing. It's a obtuse system. Frankly, I understand it because I have to for work and have to make projections for work on a regular basis. But that residential rollback has increased in each of the past 4 years. In addition to that, throughout the various taxing jurisdictions, there have been increases in levy rates that have occurred, resulting in substantial increases for the residential property tax owners. I'm focusing on the 4 largest jurisdictions within the Scott County here as we discuss this, but I'm dealing with the total tax rate. The obfuscation or confusion that happens is that a lot of these jurisdictions focus only on their rate, the city rate, the school rate, what the county does, what various taxing jurisdiction does. But the taxpayer pays the composite rate from 8, 9, 10, 12 different jurisdictions throughout the area. What these increases do not, and what I'm not accounting for in any of this discussion, is increases in property assessments or increases in values for the property. Scott County went through a residential reassessment last year, 2011, which resulted in increases for several property taxes. We're also not talking about fee increases. All of these jurisdictions across this time have had some increase in fees, garbage, sewer, whatever. We like to bring that up because philosophically we believe in fees and fee for services, but when we're in a monopolistic system where you cannot choose to go to another provider for those fees, they are effectively and functionally a tax. And in a lot of cases, they were rolled out of the tax rate and created as fees in order to raise revenue. So we need to be looking at those. We also aren't talking about here about the commercial reassessments that the city of Davenport went through in 2010, and I believe Scott County budgeted for that in 2011, correct? So there's some things there we're not talking about. Next slide. The residential rollback is tied to the increase in farmland prices. The Department of Revenue every year announces what that rollback rate will be. It has increased every year since 2007. It's gone from 44% of the assessed value with some change to 50.7518% of the assessed value for 2011. That in 2010 to 2011 alone, that's a 4.58% increase. At that trend line, 5 to 7 years, property taxes are going to be 60% or higher of the residential property value. And I bring that up because many of the discussions, or one of the discussions in the State House right now, is to lower commercial property tax rates to that 60% level. And one of the things we're going to talk about later is just some suggestions for state legislators as they approach commercial rollbacks there. Go ahead to the next slide. We're going to go through this real quickly. In every jurisdiction, you can see as those lines increase. Davenport's red, Bettendorf's green, Eldridge is yellow, LeClaire is blue. Every jurisdiction has had an increase in the taxable value within their, or in the total assessed value within their districts. So in addition to the residential rollback rate going up, they've all had increases within their communities. Some of them have been substantial. Double percentages back in 2006 to 2007 in Bettendorf, Eldridge, and LeClaire. LeClaire has had 9.5, 7.5. They've all been quite high. Go ahead to the next slide. Go ahead to the next slide there. You got it? The
It's hard to
taxable
see this
value.
far back. Sorry,
That's
guys.
fine.
That's why I'm passing these out.
The taxable value is a percentage of that because of the residential rollback. But again, all of those have had substantial increases. Again, several double-digit increases in 2006 to 2007. And even in the next year, Bettendorf has got a 5.52% increase in their taxable value within their jurisdiction. So it's not as though these communities and taxing districts are not increasing in the amount of revenue that they can levy a tax on. In addition to that, across this period of time, go ahead to the next slide if you could, the total tax levy has gone up across all these communities. Davenport has been actually probably steady from 39, dropping in 2007, but then steadily increasing up to, I added in the projected $1.25 per thousand that they're talking about at their budget meetings there, up to 41.54. That doesn't include any other jurisdiction's potential within that. Every other jurisdiction has had a steady increase in their levy rates across that period of time. Some of that came because Davenport and Bettendorf shifted their dispatching service to counties and to the county, and it created a new taxing jurisdiction. And a lot of that increase that occurred, what was that, 2010 or 2009 that happened?
10.
2010 tax rate was related to the creation of that jurisdiction. But again, all the levies have been going up. So the impact here go ahead to the next slide, is that the residential tax rates have been going up. In Davenport, the residential tax rate, effective rate, this is the rollback times the rate, just under $18 in 2006 to projected to be over $21 in 2011. All of the other jurisdictions have had increases similarly. LeClaire went from 16 to now over 19. Bettendorf from 1569 to 1794. Go ahead to the next rate. See? The total increase, go ahead to the next one.
The next one?
I'm sorry, go back, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
That annualized change, and you can see it there when that residential rollback starts kicking in 2008, in 2009, in 2010, and 2011, the rate that homeowners have been paying has been increasing substantially. Minimum. The lowest number there is 2.9%, about 1.18 in LeClaire in 2010. But some of those increases out in Eldridge and LeClaire have been quite high, 7.5%. Davenport has been lowest, has been 3.57 in 2010. The projected increase with their $1.25 increase in the city added into that is 7.82% on the homeowner here within the city of Davenport. And that's a residential homeowner. Go ahead to the next sheet. That cumulative increase in the city of Davenport across 5 taxing years, 22.8%. It brackets 20%. And LeClaire, it's over 23. This is during a period of time when we've been in recession. This is a period of time, comparatively speaking, the CPI across that same period of time is 12.5%. So residential property owners' taxes for services within their local districts have increased at greater than a time and a half inflation during that period of time. And that's something that we felt a need to bring awareness to. This is something that not a lot of taxpayers are aware of. They see their bill, they complain, and they often go on. The discussion that's been had, and you hear routinely in the news releases and stuff, it's only going to be $32 per $100,000 house. Well, the effect across that period of time, go ahead and scoot that slide up a little bit because the bottom has got the meat. In Davenport, if that $1.25 per thousand rate that they're talking about comes in, is that across from 2007 to 2011, a $100,000 house has had almost $400 in tax increases during that period of time, $100 a year. The others all are very similar in terms of increases, $300 to $400 per year across the last 4 years when we've been in a recession, when there has been little or no inflation, comparatively speaking. Go ahead to the next slide. One of the things we're hoping to do here a little bit and continue is that there's a confusing tax system here. Just in the last year, in March, you received if the assessment went up, which Diane's did, you received a letter from the assessor that said what your new assessment will be. At that time, you had the option to go down to the Board of Review and protest, tight window, April and May. Hearings were in June and July. Shortly after those hearings, you got a bill. But that bill had nothing to do with the assessment notice you received 2 months earlier. That bill was for the 2010 assessment, 18 months earlier. In September, you paid those 2010 assessed taxes. Now, in January 12, they're talking about reestablishing levy rates or reevaluating that throughout the community. You won't see that tax bill till August of 2013. It directly relates to the March notice you got, but by the time you get the tax bill, as Diane has said several times, it's too late. The time to protest, the time to talk to the taxing bodies, to the elected officials, is now, when they're establishing the levy rates for that bill that will come out in August. That system is confusing to people, and that's something we'd like to raise the awareness of, and I think we need to ask our community leaders to raise the awareness of that as it comes about. So much of this is a stealth, hidden kind of increase. And frankly, most of the elected officials treat that residential rollback as found money. It's money that they can spend, money that they don't acknowledge that they're getting. Next slide. What we'd like to see here, frankly, is more transparency among our local governments. We'd like to see and have them clearly acknowledge the additional revenue and the additional taxable value that they're achieving each year as that residential rollback increases. We'd like them to stop the no increase misinformation comments that they make. Yeah, there's been no increase in the levy rate, but every single residential homeowner in Scott County, if they do nothing to the levy rates and if nothing happens to the assessed value, is going to have a 4.58% increase in their property taxes this year. Nothing they can do about that because it's automatic, it's hidden. And frankly, it will amount to, across the state, probably the largest gross dollar tax increase that happens in the state. We also ask our taxing bodies here in our local governments to be aware when they discuss things that what is paid is that gross dollar back there. The $39 to $41 in Davenport across that period of time, the lower numbers in other communities. When we have discussions, so many of them are talking only about their jurisdiction and their efforts without being aware of the total impact on the taxpayer. If Davenport does nothing, or even lowers their rate, most taxpayers are still going to have an increase in their property tax bill because of the other taxing jurisdictions. The school district has a larger taxing body and a larger levy rate than the city. The county has an impact on that, as do all the other smaller jurisdictions. We encourage local governments here very much to cut costs. Any business that can't live with a 4.6% increase in their primary revenue source in a private industry source would be considered poorly managed. As noted there before, the CPI increase during that period of time was 12.5%, and the local bodies are getting over 20% increase in revenue from that basic revenue source. And that doesn't account for increases in assessed value that occurred throughout the bodies, as we illustrated earlier. We have some suggestions with that we'd like to throw out, at least to see brought into the discussion. The top one was something a buddy of mine brought up over coffee the other day that I thought was an interesting suggestion. The upper management staff, and none of the discussions that we've seen with the school in Davenport or within the city, very few of those cuts reach into upper management or into administrative staff. Frankly, until the people who are making the decisions that brought us into this role take some of the hit, I don't think we're serious about making cuts. We'd like to suggest that all of our local jurisdictions, cities, counties, school districts, consider one unpaid furlough day. This is something that happens in California, it happens in other jurisdictions. And they do that before they make cuts to service staff and people who are out in the street. We also would encourage, as is done in private industry throughout the nation, to privatize areas, especially areas where the city competes with tax-paying entities. The compost facility in Davenport competes directly with local landscaping firms that sell mulch and compost, competes directly with Home Depot and Lowe's and other firms that sell that product. The golf courses compete directly with private golf courses. Davenport, Bettendorf, Scott County. Garbage services, there's plenty of private trash payers throughout the trash providers. Sewer operations, cafeterias and schools, there's other areas that they should look at aggressively privatizing services to drop costs. This is the tack that corporations have taken throughout the nation in order to cut their costs. It's not un-American, it's not inappropriate. The other areas that we like to see discussed is with the state legislature. And Todd copied all of our local legislators with this. We need to simplify the property tax system in the state. When you have those overlapping dates we talked about earlier, and when in order to figure out what your taxes are, you need to multiply by two numbers with 5 significant digits after the decimal point, it's too complicated. It's not transparent enough. We'd like to see the homeowners be given a level of certainty year to year so they don't have this stealth, this hidden increase in terms of the residential rollback increasing every year. We also very much would like to see the state legislature give the local governments tools to control costs. Clearly, as every one of the politicians that I've talked to, and I spent half an hour on the phone with my alderman last night, reforms are needed for the union contracts and retirement costs. But until I see our local elected officials stand up with their administrators and openly call for the Iowa State Senate to take up the bill that was passed in the House last year to reform those union laws, I question how serious they are. And I think those people need to take that action in order to control their costs and take some political risks here. No one in the private industry who looks at our current employment costs for unionized labor within the cities and the schools has anything close to those kind of packages, and they need to be changed. We're not anti-union here. We just like to roll this back so that what's being done is realistic. But we also strongly encourage our elected officials here, especially the prominent elected Democratic officials, to stand up and take that stand and ask the Iowa Senate to take up a bill that the House passed last year. The last thing we're asking the citizens here is that we've created a petition. It's online at Opt4Better.org. We have hard copies here. We'd like you to sign that petition in whatever various form that you want to sign it. And we're going to make an effort to present those at public hearings or the voting bodies as they get closer to decision-making time in order to get some citizen awareness of that. All of the elected officials, is that correct, Todd? All of the elected officials' contact information is also available?
It will be.
It will be available on our website. So that we encourage all of the citizens to contact their elected officials directly and tell them no tax increase. The petition here, I'm going to read it after I take a drink. This is attention all elected officials in Scott County, Iowa. Lower the tax levy for residential taxes in 2012-13, the payable in 2012-13. It reads, because government needs to live within its means, and with the recent rollback increase of 2% additional taxable valuation, local governments and school boards have no excuse to not reduce the tax levy. Residential rollback rate has increased in each of the past 4 years. As a result, overall tax rates have increased in the past 5 years. This does not include increases in property assessment, fee increases, or commercial reassessments. We hereby petition you to opt for better when it comes to establishing the tax levy rate for fiscal year 2012-13, payable 2012-13. The rollback increase is not a license to increase spending. Therefore, we petition you to lower the tax levy, and we're being audacious here, but we'd like to see it lowered back to the pre-recession levels. We don't see any reason why we can't go back to 2008 for your jurisdiction and decrease real spending levels rather than simply decreasing an increase in future spending, which is the verbiage we hear so often from government bodies. But this demand is not met, and we've had discussions with this, clearly had discussions with this with several people, and we are doing some of the legal research necessary to be sure it's possible. If we see a tax increase go through our taxing bodies, as a group, we're prepared to put together a petition to put on the fall 2012 ballot a referendum to remove the local option sales tax from the communities. We feel this is very much like having a teenager who you're given an allowance and they're not spending the money, and if not spending the money properly, and if they're not behaving properly, you cut their allowance. If they can't figure out how to cut their spending, we feel we need to take away some of the revenue sources. So this is something we're strongly considering. We know there's some legal implications and petitioning hurdles involved. Not sure whether we can actually do it, but it's something we've looked at and we'll strongly consider if it comes up. So, we encourage anyone to please contact your elected officials and sign the petitions online. Any questions? Yes.
The council's meeting tonight, I believe. Is that correct?
When is that?
Or is it tomorrow?
I know.
Tomorrow.
Is it, what can we do at the council meeting?
Load the council chambers and tell them not to increase your taxes. That's the best possibility with that. To have one of the aldermen there say publicly in a meeting that he's heard no objections to a tax increase is upsetting. Citizens need to have a voice, and now is the time to have a voice. It's a decision-making week. Anything else?
Looking at taking away revenue through this local option sales tax, and I can't remember off the top of my head what Davenport uses it for. So, but then you said you weren't opposed to fees. Suddenly, what did you pay to use this room today?
Nothing.
Okay, so suddenly you have to pay $50 to use this room. Just to check out a book in the city of Davenport, you have to have a library card that's $10. At what point is this not a hidden tax by charging somebody who wants to just check out a book?
No, that's exactly what I said. There's been a migration of things that were typically included in tax rates to fees. So, no, we can't, and I don't have not enough time in the day to catalog all those things, but those are hidden tax increases. Those are things, especially when there's
But
not
you're still
a
getting a
competition.
city service one way or the other.
You're getting a city service, and I'd love to see more of those go to a fee-for-service basis. But from a moral standpoint, frankly, when I can't choose another provider for that service, when I am obligated to use the city provider for that service, there's no competition. That fee is math. It's not market.
But I hear using the library again as an example. I think anybody would tell you that when the library is a losing cause, you're not making any, if any, money. Who are you going to call? Who's going to come in to compete with Davenport library system?
Libraries are a unique thing. There's several areas where there is competition available, and competition would be readily available if it were allowed. Yes.
Have you looked at independent contractors, many of the services that they deliver? In other words, by bidding with an independent contractor as opposed to negotiating with public unions? Public unions that have been studied to show their cost is about 140 to 60% of private competition.
You're reading the same studies I am. That's why we're encouraging privatizing and outsourcing. That the costs associated
So
with
are you
those.
able to demonstrate some other cities that are doing that to show them what can be done?
I'm sure there can. I just read a lovely article about Tulsa. Went through a major reassessment of their financial situation, and a lot of what they did there was along those lines.
In the state of Georgia, there are cities there also that have that.
There's several in California that have also outsourced a significant portion of
And
their
then there's
services.
articles they reduce their city cost by some 40%.
Yes, I think the city needs to aggressively look at that, rather than look at just narrow areas such as, I think the only RFPs out right now are golf courses in Davenport. They need to look at larger.
It's a way to compete with
Very much.
service.
And that's what we're encouraging, as we've always encouraged. Anything else? Good. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate your time. I have copies of the slides up here for anyone who'd like them.